The Northwest home for paranormal. You're listening to U.S. Phenomenon with your host, Mario Magana.
Our guest, Tobe Johnson, is no stranger to this show, but he does host his own show called Strange Brow Radio. Tonight, we will take advantage and talk to him about some of his new adventures and his new released book called The Al Moon Lab. With incredible evidence connecting Sasquatch to the paranormal, it is my pleasure to welcome back to U.S. Phenomenon, Tobe Johnson. Welcome back to the show.
Reporting for duty, sir. How are you?
Oh my gosh. How you been?
Well, it's busy in these parts here. August is just note to self when it comes to months out of the year. August, if it were as a number, I'd probably call it 666. It's a crazy month, and I don't suggest planning to do anything other than projects during August.
Don't scare people with that kind of talk. You start throwing out those numbers, and people are like, "Oh no, he's the Antichrist."
Well, yeah, you haven't heard nothing yet.
Oh man. Okay, so you got a new book out. You released this new book, and this is giving a whole new experience because this is a digital book, correct? Right, with the ability to look at links and interact and things of that nature. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's a rabbit hole of a book. It's multi-layered, immersive, and it's about 175 pages with over 42 QR codes embedded in particular paragraphs that pertain to the things that are associated with those particular paragraphs. And so as you're reading along, you may want to hear some audio or see a video or look at some of the journals or papers or meet some of the witnesses. And then you just take your phone, put it on photo mode on your smartphone, point it right there at the QR code, which everyone should get used to nowadays. That will hyperlink you to the publishing company where a video is going to stream right to your device.
So for those who may not know who you are, let's explain to everyone your expertise and how you got into this whole thing.
I'm just persistent. I'm no expert. If anybody ever said anything about me, go, well, he is right about that. He is persistent. And so, I'm just the guy that keeps knocking on doors. And when it came to the paranormal, I've knocked on a lot of doors over the last 15 years. And as I began to, meet these people that would answer the door for me, in some cases, quite literally, I got to find out that not only is the paranormal real, but it seems to be interconnected like a spider web. And there's different, stories that can be told. It's multi-layered, but one sort of phenomena leads to the next phenomena. And if I'm sounding ambiguous, well, it's an ambiguous subject matter, and it's difficult to explain if you're going to try to explain it at all. And I did the best I could to help people understand that Bigfoot is related to the supernatural. And for people that don't know, that was my foundational, groundwork as far as looking into this, was the world of Sasquatch leading from the flesh and blood down into the Twilight Zone.
And this is because you had your own experience. Is that correct?
Little by little. It took me, again, I always say I was an ambulance chaser. And by that, I mean, I would go look at other people's reports and kind of, feed off of their information as much as possible to live vicariously and hopefully get into an area where I could eventually just have a sighting. And I thought, well, that's where the bread and butter, the mystery is I just want to see a Sasquatch. But then as I got to know the phenomena, and people kept telling me that the story is much stranger. In fact, the first witness I ever talked to, who starts us off in the book, the Al Moon Lab, is a river guide. And he went on to tell me that, if you get interested in Sasquatch, the problem is that the story is much too strange. And I don't know if you'd ever believe me if I were to tell you. And that really sunk the treble hook into this old trout. And I've been, pulling on the line ever since. And it's been an interesting ride, one that I still entertain as being kind of part of me. And the phenomena of Sasquatch is obviously a cultural phenomena here, mainly in the United States. I would say the Pacific Northwest has looked at it as a gimmick or a giant marketing campaign. Of course, the Seattle Supersonics, I think, had it as a mascot at one time, which I wish they would bring that back. But when it comes to the reality of what Sasquatch may be and what they're connected with, these mysteries love to keep themselves secret. And why is that? Why have we walked away with only, for the most part, 2 or 3 grainy films that seem to show what everyone's described, but mainly footprints and a little bit of forensic stuff that seems to point to mostly human, with this other male progenitor side that is ambiguous at best. And why would that be? That's just the first part of the mystery, is why we don't have the bones yet and why we have so little information. But once you start getting into this and interviewing and befriending these extended experiencers who have prolonged interaction with Sasquatch, you'll see that they're totally immersed in the paranormal. And if you love a good mystery, well, this is the book for you.
Our guest tonight is Tobe Johnson, locally here in Western Washington. His book, which is released this week, The Al Moon Lab, a paranormal experiment, is in paperback. You can get it on Amazon. You can get it Kindle Fire or the Kindle app as well. 170 pages. I'm excited to get my hands on the book and to understand, because I've always been the guy who loves the idea of Sasquatch being indigenous to the planet. To have and to be able to take this and learn from and kind of open my horizons to what others have experienced. I'm excited for that. And for those who are out there who may be naysayers, this book really covers a lot of that, the groundwork from you guys tracking Sasquatch footprints, DNA, collection of DNA. Is that right?
Although we never sent any of these samples off to have DNA analysis, we took care of it as though it was going to eventually go that route. And just a little warning on the book. The book is written for everybody, but it has been targeted towards people that are experiencers. It's written so specifically for people that are not only interested in the phenomena, but live with the phenomena of the supernatural. And so we talk in code a little bit because we experience things that other people are going to take issue with, things like apportations. What is an apportation? Well, that's when an item or an object or a thing appears out of nowhere without rhyme or reason through space or time. And so to talk like that, you're never going to move the needle with the skeptic. They have to go on their own journey. And you're never going to win that battle. If they want to go on that journey with you, then you can befriend them and take them into a place that you think might be successful for that. But for the skeptic, I just don't have time for it. Not now in the midst of, the great reset that's happening here with the globe. I'm speaking specifically to people that want to know more about this, how we interacted with it, and things to look for if you want to move forward.
And when you say that, and you're referring to because people out there may be naysayers. I mean, there is a lot of that going on these days. But for those who may be interested, what would be like let's say I'm afraid to talk. I would come to you and say, look, I think I've seen something, but I'm afraid to share that information because it was not of a human element, where it was of that, other dimension where I'm like, whoa, I saw it and then it was gone like that.
Mm-hmm.
What are you telling most of these people? I mean, give us something here that might be able in this book that kind of just talks to everyone who may not be naysayers are like, look, man, I got Bigfoot out here in, Bonnie Lake. I see it all the time.
Mm-hmm. They're not alone. And much like, things that are taboo to talk about, dare you may be shadow banned by social media if you speak the truth. And as it comes to the paranormal, you can be shadow banned by friends, loved ones, relatives, spouses, brothers, sisters, people at work. So it's not in their best interest to talk about this. Now that's changing based upon the disclosure wave that's happening with the UFOs.
Right.
Everyone pretty much believes and or has had an experience with a strange, light in the sky or something that didn't make sense. But certainly above and beyond that are ghosts. I would say after looking into this that maybe 80% of people believe in some kind of spirit contact, that this mortal coil goes on and we can contact the non-living in some way, pets, animals, humans, loved ones. But when it comes to cryptids or things like apportations, levitation, this strange otherness of what I would call land spirits that seem to come in, the Native Americans would talk about them quite often. You have an issue with that, especially here where the industry, hunters, outdoorsmen, people that have not had contact, that have experienced a lot of time in the woods. And so these people that experience so much time as being outdoorsmen, I mean, I think REI started out here in the Pacific Northwest, the Pacific Crest Trails out here, our lumber industry, the hunters, everyone that has been out in the woods, not had an experience with Bigfoot, they can be pretty confrontational with the fact that you had an experience. And it can be really nasty. Like we had a yard sale here over the weekend, and a guy showed up and found out about me and my girlfriend both being experiencers. He came back the next day to take issue with it. I mean, so he left the garage sale and he's like, I'm an avid outdoorsman. Are you guys flat earthers as well? And we were so, I mean, I kind of expect, I expect people that once in a while you'll find people like that, but it just gets kind of weird. Like the way people get upset about the fact that you had an experience. And that's
your story to tell. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, what's the big deal? Why? I mean, it's not like you're like, hey, I like coffee, I like tea. When he's like, are you a flat earther? Even if you were, so what? That's your business. What?
I think that they feel as though they should be privy to all the information. I don't want to say this about this person, but people generally are afraid, and they espouse it as fear and control. But at the base of it is fear. They're afraid of the consequences of what you're saying. And I don't have the luxury to sit back and say that this doesn't exist anymore. I've seen too much. And just short of having a full-bodied Sasquatch present itself to me, the things that have happened here, what I have seen, and all the people I've talked to, including, have the luxury to sit back and say it doesn't exist anymore. I have an overwhelming data set here, and it refuses to leave once you start experiencing it. Once you start to engage this phenomenon, and actually accept that it's real, it will follow you. If you look into what happened at Skinwalker Ranch, these places exist all over the globe. And the hitchhiker phenomenon is something they discuss, not only in the book, but Bigelow discusses it. I'm sure anybody who's been to Skinwalker Ranch has had this happen, where the phenomena will follow you home. And they did have Bigfoot humanoid sightings at Skinwalker Ranch. They also had werewolf sightings, which people don't really know about. But I think that we might have experienced something very similar in Cottage Grove. So all these crazy stories coalescing on these properties is something very real, very tangible. They're super interested in the potpourri of the paranormal. They spend a lot of money to study it underneath your nose. And now they're sort of talking it via Harry Reid. And, the money that was sent out to Utah, we spent no money except our own money to look at this phenomena, and just, hit the books and record a lot of audio and a lot of video. And that's what the book's about.
Our guest tonight, Tobe Johnson, the author of the Al Moon Lab. You can find in numerous places. If you're watching online, you will see the web publisher. You can also find it online. Who's getting the most money, Amazon or who should we be? Should we send him to Amazon or should we send him to the publisher?
You know what? I think you can send them straight to the publisher. There's a lot of other books that are coming their way, and start with Hanger One Publishing, the number one publishing.com, and then go to Amazon.
We'll have that linked as well on the podcast if you missed that. You know what's interesting as we're talking about this, we'll ask you in the second half some of your experience that you're able to share with us that may have made the book or may make the second edition of your book later down the road. You know, it's nice to have someone local as, you know, we continue to grow this show, you grow yours. There's plenty of room to have everyone out here to talk about their experiences, share those stories. You know, as you were talking about the experiences you have, I was at a summer barbecue here out in the neighborhood out here in Bonnie Lake, and a young man came to me and says, "Oh, you have a paranormal show? Dude, there's a lot of stuff out here. A lot of stuff. I've seen a lot of stuff, including stuff like skinwalker type stuff," he said. He's like, "We live in a brand new house. I hear things in the house," and his dad dismisses it. He's like, "No, you're hearing things. It's nothing." He's like, before all the houses got built in, his house was one of the first houses. And he explained that he saw like Native Americans walking through the woods. And he's also said he's had his own experiences out in the woods when he's walking. And he's like, it's the weirdest thing. Now, he says, as he continues to get older, this young man, he's seen less of it. I said, that's because you're not using that muscle as much as you used to. You got to, right? Is that true? Like he's not using, it's starting to close in on him where he's just becoming,
I don't know.
A believer, but
right. I didn't have experiences young. I mean, they didn't happen until I chased after him. And that, if I had any theory, it has to do with finding the right person to do this with, because there seems to be a tuning fork theory where you know, a tuning fork is two pieces of metal with a handle, and in order to make it work, you got to get both of those vibrating at the same time to get the tone. I think there might be something to be said about that with another individual. Now, it can be surprising who that person may be. It may not be your wife or your girlfriend or your husband. It may be a neighbor, you know, or a mechanic. And when you two, you know, somehow are connected together, the supernatural seems appeased or attracted to it. And so I've found that out. Other people that are into the phenomena, especially Bigfoot, would agree that there seems to be that. Also, a light heart and a sense of humor. There seems to be something about that. At least having these extended, prolonged, non-creepy experiences. When they come to your house, generally speaking, in our case, it's just like if you move to a town and you got to know your neighbors. They're going to let you in more to their lives and share more with you, and before you know it, you're having a potluck with them. But if you're just staying at a hotel, you know, and to compare that to someone who's doing a TV show about the paranormal or Bigfoot, and they've got 72 hours in the woods, for the most part, they're going to get cursory response stuff, tree knocks, you know, strange audio stuff. They're not going to get the gifting. They're not going to get these gifts of significance, we'll call them, where things that you are either interested in or just spoke about, need, use, want, are set before you in plain sight in areas that are impossible for a human to go and do that. And that's really an important first step to understand how all this works. For example, one of the first stories, and I'll relate here just real quick, is there was a place up the McKenzie in Oregon where James Bobo Fay from Finding Bigfoot sent a friend of mine because he was having a positive interaction in the woods up there. And so this friend and his son went into the woods, and within 24 hours, they had rocks and pine cones throwing at them in the dead of night around their tent. And The next night after they had left the campsite, because it got too aggressive, they came back. I came with them, and there was a fresh, Sasquatch barefooted track walking into a spring about 14 inches. And near that area where they were having interaction, there was a pair of tennis shoes set below their gifting station where they'd left food for Bigfoot. And these tennis shoes looked like they were pulled out of a cave. They had a mossy patina on them. They were sitting right underneath these cherry tomatoes that they left for Bigfoot. They were not there the day before. Now, what's interesting about those shoes? Well, around the campfire, they're talking about being financially desperate and how the son couldn't afford a pair of tennis shoes for basketball season. These things were his size. They were absolutely set exactly where they would find them. And they were set there between the moment that we found the Sasquatch track and went into this gifting station. So like a window of like 30 minutes in broad daylight, these shoes were left there. It was an amazing moment. Tom Powell, the author, wrote about it. It's a much longer story, but the point is that these gifts of significance, like these shoes, also could be a hiker who's needing water, and all of a sudden he's walking up the trail that he just came on, and he sees a thermos sitting straight up with a mossy patina in the middle of the trail. Or somebody like myself that was looking for a taxidermied rabbit, and the next day he finds a rabbit with a rock in its head sitting in front of its door. These stories go on and on and on, as far as looking into the Sasquatch conundrum. So do I think they're a damn dirty ape? No. Because, in concert with these gifts are large, greasy handprints, footprints, hair, vocalizations, and vocabulary, language.
Our guest tonight, Tobe Johnson, who is the author of the Al Moon Lab. You can find at www.hanger1publishing.com. When we come back, we're going to find out a little bit more on how this gifting goes. For those who don't really understand, you're like, wait, how does this work? He will give us some more insight on that. Plus, we're going to ask him to share some of his experiences that he's had, and maybe some that he didn't put in the publishing or in his book. We'll be back. It is U.S. Phenomenon. Welcome back to the show. Our guest tonight is Tobe Johnson. Welcome back to the show. The author of a newly released book, The Al Moon Lab. Thank you for joining us. You can find this at www.hanger1publishing.com. If you missed any of that information, it'll be published in the podcast later on this evening. Tobe, welcome back to the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Mario.
So, as we were discussing earlier, you were talking about gifting and how the entities will gift. Like, let's say I'm on a hike. You were talking about if you were gifted a rabbit, others were gifted shoes. How does, for someone like myself who's never been gifted anything, well, that's not true, but I've not been gifted anything out in the wilderness. Explain how this works and how, let's just say, maybe I'm interested. How does one receive gifts, or how do they come to one?
I don't know how it works. I just know that it happens, and why they choose the people that they do it with, I can only speculate on it. I think that when you have this happen, the phenomena present itself on or near your property or cabin that you go to once in a while, or
right,
even a campsite that you treat as a home. A lot of people, go on these remote campsites, and it's their hidden secret spot. Once they get used to individuals, the same way that a neighborhood would get used to a new neighbor, that gifts show up at your door, just like they used to do. Someone would show up at your house with a pie back in the old days. It seems to be the same kind of initiation process. Now, the tricky part of it is that you don't really get to meet the giver, and sometimes it can be a little squeamish. In the case of the dead rabbit, I was looking for a taxidermied rabbit to put in an art installation, and I was building, a life-size 8.5-foot Sasquatch structure on this property where all this activity was happening. As extraordinary as that sounds, here I am building a life-size 8.5-foot Sasquatch, and I want to put a taxidermied rabbit, on the base of it where the Sasquatch will be standing. It's called the terraform, and I wanted to symbolize kind of the rabbit hole we go down. And so we were actively having this conversation on the property. And at that time, I was a truck driver going up from Cottage Grove, Oregon to Seattle, up and down I-5. And it was just a regular 5-day-a-week job, and I worked weird hours. And I got home, I think it was a summer month, and getting back in the afternoon and sitting maybe 6 feet away from the nose of my trailer was a sprawled out, fresh, dead rabbit. And it was so fresh. I think it was like 95 degrees or something that day, and everything was gravel. It was a gravel bed yard. And there was not a bug on this rabbit. There was no bees. There was definitely no maggots. It had just been killed. Now, obviously, a hawk could have killed this rabbit, and maybe it could have fallen, and maybe the gravel could have stuck in its head. But the interesting part about it is not only the timing that I'm looking for a rabbit, but the fact that afterwards I said, well, thank God they didn't leave me a snake. I hate snakes. I do not like snakes. And I was so grateful because I'd heard stories. Well, 3 days later in the exact same location, what do you think happened?
You got a snake left.
They left me a snake in the exact spot with its head decapitated, just getting home from work. No bugs on it. The snake had just started to bloat a little bit. It wasn't moving, but you could see where something had pinched the head off like a bean, and it was just freshly killed right there, just like the rabbit. And that really unnerved me for the fact that not only was the rabbit possible, right, that something had heard us talk about it, that if this was a hoax, it got to be a lot more serious as far as diabolical behavior from someone playing a practical joke.
Right.
But by this time, we had already found giant humanoid handprints on the bed of the truck, on the eaves of the garage, as though something was trying to lift up the eaves going into the garage or hide itself. We'd found hair, giant knee impressions of 1,400 pounds or more from, the hills above the area. EVPs, lights in the sky, all this stuff was unfolding almost every day. And so I moved in on the property. And now this is about 14 years after, looking into Sasquatch full time and having periodic good stories and good interaction and good evidence, but nothing like this. And so I was lucky enough to be invited by these people to move in full time, park my camper there, and basically let this book write itself.
Our guest tonight is Tobe Johnson, the author of the Al Moon Lab, which you can pick up on the website, www.hanger1publishing.com. Again, when you get these kinds of gifts, you got to be thankful, right? Because, you're like, okay, at first maybe you're shocked, but then to be thankful to be presented these kinds of gifts that not the average Joe or myself or anyone has the opportunity to be gifted these gifts. This has to be very special that they are working with, or I want to say communicating, because gifting is a form of communication, is that they're saying, hey, look, we come in peace. I want to give you something to know, share with you that we're not bad. I'm guessing Bigfoot's probably a nice.
I think that they come through a pretty large door when they come in and out of wherever they come from, because I don't think they just come from the woods.
Right.
There's other things happening here, and I get into why I think that in the book. Just to elaborate on the gifting, another story that I tell in the book is I was having problems with my iPhone, having a conversation over the phone as I was having issues with it with the landowner, Daryl Adams. So here I'm in Seattle. He's down in Cottage Grove. It's a distance of at least 5 hours. When I get home from work, underneath the oar of my boat, which is parked at the property, is a muddy cell phone. It's a Sidekick, an old,
Oh,
slide out phone stuck underneath the oar of my boat. This is the actual phone. The battery is inactive. The memory card's gone. This looks like everything else that we were left, as though it's been pulled out of the lake bottom, which there was a lake nearby, or kept someplace. But to have that kind of specific item left under the oar of my boat, inside, right on top of this gravel bed near my trailer, that is the kind of specific stuff that we're talking about. Also, this little blue dinosaur was somehow set on a shelf, standing upright in the garage where, most of this activity seemed to coalesce around a hot spot. And you'll find that doors don't really matter when it comes to paranormal. And I don't think they matter a whole lot with Sasquatch either. They can take care of that phenomena themselves, however they do what they do. But I think that they can do things that we probably can do. Somehow we've forgotten, probably because we're so distracted, what we can do as individuals. Maybe we can look back at megalithic structures and say, well, that's ancient technology that made these things happen. Is it? I don't know. Maybe we were able to do things back then that we've forgotten how to do, and they haven't. I tend to think that's true. So I was finding this little blue dinosaur sitting in a locked garage on the shelf, when they're just me and two 60-year-olds who own the house, have no idea how it gets there. Things become really interesting really quick. And so you don't want to really play off the fact that you could be mistaken, you could be getting hoaxed. That's why you start recording like crazy. And there's something about audio. We have permission with the paranormal to record with audio in a way we don't really have the same permission with cameras, especially with Bigfoot, because they're constantly observing you, especially when you own property right where they live. If they're happy with you living there, they're watching you, getting off on the tricks they're playing, I suspect. We caught laughter, what almost sounds like cartoonish Scooby-Doo laughter right outside of one of the bedrooms at the house. Whatever was there seemed to be having a good time, probably at our expense. So you never really know for sure who you're dealing with. I don't think this is all Bigfoot by any means. I think that there's a lot of other things connected with it. Getting back to this, giant door that they may go through. Other things go through these doors as too, just like the bar at Mos Eisley. You don't know if you're going to bump into Chewbacca or Han Solo.
Right. On that note, when you're talking about them going through this door that may be opening, as we know that right now, there's been some headline news recently. There's a family that just recently passed away. Wife, their child, and dog died in the Sahara Mountains. And I was like, oh, man, we got to call our buddy. I was going to call Ron, because what's interesting about this is there was no odor of any kind. There was no foul play. These individuals just died.
You mean in the Sierra Mountains?
Mountains, yeah.
Okay.
They died about a mile off the trailhead. I don't remember what the trailhead was, but my first initial thought was maybe there was carbon monoxide leak inside their vehicle. Their oxygen level, their blood oxygen level was low. It was an extremely warm day. They were hiking, and boom, they fell asleep, and the rest is obviously history. But in a situation like that, or Mount Rainier, where the individual goes missing, nothing's to be found, including a water bottle, do we suspect that these entities, such as Bigfoot, that may be coming through these portals or dimensions, would they take individuals with them out? I mean, like,
sure. Let me tell you a story that isn't in the book. You'll have an exclusive on this one. Up in a place called French Pete Wilderness in the Three Sisters Wilderness, there was two people that went missing over 5 years. I believe a Professor Zhu, who was a physicist out of the University of Oregon, and a Coast Guard reservist named Jake Dutton. Now, all they found of Professor Zoo was his book bag in the creek bed. When it came to Jake Dutton, who had cold weather training and was going on a 3-day, backpacking remote hike up a easily accessible trailhead at French Pete, he never came back. And his mother posted a sign up there that said, "There was foul play involved. My son went missing because someone hurt him." Well, my buddy ended up finding his remains. And all he found of his was what had happened is Jake had ended up at a remote campsite. And although nobody had found him looking for him for 3 or 4 years and 3 or 4 years of winters, my buddy ended up going to the campsite and finding a skull cap placed face up in the ferns. Just a skull bleached out, looked like, a movie prop when he found it. And his backpack with a zipper totally zipped up, and his boots sitting right beside his head. Now, they ruled that case, I believe he died of exposure. Pretty strange way to die of exposure with your boots off, tied together, and your backpack zipped up, as though you didn't try to find any signs of rescue. Fast forward to a guy in my book named Todd, who's a Bigfooter, a witness from Cottage Grove, Oregon, lives very close to the property we're talking about today. Him and his buddy went up there to see what was going on in this particular area where people went missing. It's mentioned somewhat in David Paulides' book. Not this part. So as they're going into the woods that night, antagonizing the phenomena, calling it out, well-armed, kind of ready to go to war with things killing people up there, because that's what they suspected happened. And I'm not blaming Bigfoot, but maybe I should be. I don't know. I don't think so, or at least a variety of something up there. That night, when they fell asleep, the next morning, Todd woke up about 30 yards from where he'd fell asleep face down on a fern. When he woke up, he noticed he was covered in urine from head to toe. Everything on him was soaked. It smelled like ammonia. And then he went over to his backpack, which was slightly unzipped, and there was a gallon of piss inside his backpack. He had to pour out his backpack because it was filled with urine. It's a little bit similar in nature to what happened to Jake. Now, were they going up there blaming the wrong phenomena, saying, possibly this is a rampage of a Sasquatch killing people? It definitely wasn't a serial killer, because these guys were armed, and nobody's picking up, a redneck from Cottage Grove and moving him 30 feet. I don't care how tough or clever Ted Bundy is. So that's how crazy this stuff is. And, you hear about the strangeness happen to other people, but when it happens to you, you're not coming back the same. And that's what this book is for, those people. These stranger stories are real, and they need to be told to the people that need to hear them and read them. So to write a book was a goal of mine, but to put these QR codes in there, which is the idea of Doug Hychek, who's the inventor of Monster Quest, right? I mean, he's the guy that started Monster Quest. He's the founder, producer of History Channel's Monster Quest. So him and his son, Alex and Blaine, are brilliant. They started this publishing company, Hangar One. And the QR codes, I don't think have been done anywhere, not on this scale. Yeah. So that's where we have a documentary inside the pages. And I think there's over 2 hours of audio video.
See, that's different. That's the cool thing. I mean, especially nowadays when you're having that the feel of the book, but being able to take it, hit the QR code, and then get something to take it to that next level. Because I mean, obviously we're using our imagination as you're, telling these stories in the book, but to have a little bit of piece of audio and video just takes it to that next level.
Yeah, because the goal is, and always was, to let people know how genuine we were and how honest we were. Now, maybe we were mistaken. To debunk things takes sometimes years to figure out, hey, there was a woodpecker in the garage, and that area right there is compromised because there's a sound up there that happens due to a bird. We eventually found that out. Heat expansion on the house and the shop makes a weird creaking and popping sound. That took a couple, summers to figure out where that happens the most and what months. So those kind of things you figure out. But when it comes to things running up behind you in the dead of night that sound like an elephant on two legs, there's nothing you can do about it except say, am I going to pursue this subject or not?
And when you say that too, it's not like you would, even an experienced hiker or someone out here trying to like play a hoax on someone. We're talking like woods. We're talking dense woods that these people are in. It's not like you're going out in the neighborhood back trails that are well manicured and groomed. I know that everyone goes on hikes and whatnot. And look, as we all like to say, man, be cautious. Even myself, we went to go on a night hike to go watch the sunset up in Mount Rainier. We didn't find the hike. And things things changed rapidly for us. At the further we went on this trail, the more it just didn't feel welcoming anymore. And this is just my own experience where all of a sudden we're on the trail and there's 3 pieces of logs that are been placed strategically, 3 in a row. It's like boom, boom, boom. And neatly put there. And I was like, that's odd. Why? Where did these come from? I'm like,
there's a consistency with where and how they seem to leave stick formations, logs, branches, rocks, pretty much anything of nature that seems of interest as far as being a marker, they'll utilize. But stick formations are, kind of tricky when you're out in the woods because nature does crazy stuff. But when you're in a gravel driveway separated from trees, especially, the Doug firs are on the outer perimeter of this giant gravel driveway, and you have a secured area and you see these almost runic alphabet stick structures, laid in certain areas over and over, generally 4 sticks that are about 8 inches long, making these runic alphabets in these specific areas. It gets really interesting. And as far as trying to figure out what's going on with that language, some people think that they know. I know that there's a couple of books out there on stick symbolism or glyphs, as they call them. But what you're describing out in the woods may be the fact that you weren't supposed to go any farther. Maybe these, I've seen footage. I've talked to people that said I could not go any farther past A, B, or C, an invisible line in the sand. And those sticks maybe were something like that.
And especially for someone like myself, who's, as I always say, I'm like, well, I haven't had any cool encounters. I really have to turn to people like yourself to have come on the show to share your experiences, because to me, I think they're the most interesting stories out there, because your story is completely different from, Tim down the street and all these different experiences, like the young man who lives down the street who has all kinds of experiences. His dad at the barbecue was like, whatever. I listened. His stories are real. Those are his experiences. I can't knock that, right? I mean, it's not my place to knock. I told him, you got to come on the show and share that stuff, because a lot of the time, especially out here, I think people forget that, this land was rich in culture with a lot of native indigenous people, and including downtown Seattle, the Duwamish tribe. There's a lot of tribes out here that have gone away, or they're on their own little areas, but this land was full of different tribes. And so you're going to see some different experiences out here, including ghosts and things of that nature. Tobe, as we get close to wrapping things up, let's kind of, put a bow on this thing. For someone like myself, who's only I freaked out when I saw those, sticks. I was like, wait, why am I we're driving, trying to find this trailhead. And I'm like, why am I seeing 3 sticks in that position? They're just not fallen. They were strategically placed on the gravel road. As we wrap things up here for the radio show, Where can people find you? Obviously, you have your podcast still going. Let's talk about that. What's some hot topics you got coming up in the next week or two?
Well, so we talk a little bit of everything. I just released an episode on Satanism. It was back and forth between me and a professor at the University of Oregon who is a Satanist. And we were having pizza and beer talking Satan. It was a very strange, nerve-wracking conversation for me. I think it was like the 8th interview I did 3 years ago. Well, I had to scrub it because as Google Analytics is going along, this professor is looking for new work and finding that people are Googling his name and coming up with this episode called, Satan's Helper. So I get a phone call from him and said, "Hey, we got to do something about this, man. I cannot get a job." It's a really incredible interview. The guy, I love this guy. Like, he was just a really good guy, but he had a intellectual choice that he made in why he was, a Satanist. He wouldn't call himself a devil worshiper, but if you want to hear why somebody chooses that, he explains it in a way that I didn't know. So it's a really interesting conversation in a pizza parlor between me and a Satanist, and that one just came up out of the woodwork. And of course, he's a little more anonymous these days because of it.
Because of hey man, I mean, good for you. Good marketing on your behalf for getting that.
Mm-hmm.
Too bad for him because hopefully he'll find himself some employment here in the future. But man, that's great.
Yeah. Well, not so great for most people. I'm sure it's not everybody's cup of tea, but we've talked about everything from, not only Sasquatch. That's just the base foundation for me to look into other things. But I've taken road trips out to Area 51 and done episodes on, the lights over Tonopah that we filmed. And I try to get out in the field as much as I can to verify and look into some of these stories. The Mima Mountains, we just did a research trip down to near, I think it's called Mossy Creek or something like that, south of Olympia. An amazing earth anomaly. Interviewed Marcia K. Moore, of course, up in northern Washington. We all know Marcia's work. And
Yes.
We're now working on some projects back and forth together when time allows. So interesting couple years because of COVID. I used to do a lot of live events, and we did those at a haunted castle at Manresa Castle in Port Townsend. We're just now starting those again on October 27th. So if you have October 27th free, it's a Wednesday night. Be there around 6 o'clock. We set up at 7, and we're going to have a debate between Flesh and Blood and Woo regarding Sasquatch. It's going to be a one-on-one hosted by Pete Orbea, who does the Ghost Conference out here at Port Gamble. And it's going to be an hour and a half of back and forth between Rich Germeau, who is believes primarily that this is a paranormal phenomena, ex-law enforcement out here from the Olympic Peninsula, retired now, and then Brent Dill, who is a Flesh and Blood guy about the phenomena.
Wait, who's the guy that you said was retired?
His name's so his name's Rich Germeau. People know his story a little bit who live out here, but he was a sheriff, a deputy sheriff out here, and had a Sasquatch encounter off of Harstein Island, and wouldn't let it go, and ended up really pushing back on the police department about what was going on. Became a full-time researcher and found that the phenomena followed him home, and it has these paranormal attributes.
Our guest this evening, Tobe Johnson. As we wrap things up here from the Pacific Northwest, I'd like to thank him for taking the time this evening to hang out with us. You can find him on his radio show on, I'm sure, every platform available. Strange Brow Radio, is that correct?
That's it.
You can find the book on many platforms as well, but go to www.hanger1publishing.com to get the Al Moon Lab available now. You can get a paperback. Of course, I think that's what I'm going to do. I have a problem with the Kindle anyhow, but pick up a couple copies, and Tobe, we'll see you soon again. Hey, by the way, those bases out there, those old like Fort Flagler and all them, it's got to be haunted, right?
I haven't walked back with any haunting stories. I've been to Flagler and the one out there in Port Townsend. Haven't had any action, but the night's still young.
Yeah. Well, if you come across anything, let me know. We definitely were in Flagler this summer and was cold, was interesting. I'm like, didn't find anything. I was like, all right, well, my daughter's like trying to freak me out. She's like, ooh, Dad. I was like,
I will tell you, Manresa Castle is certainly haunted, and we have incredible evidence from Manresa Castle. So if you show up for live events that we do out there every other month, starting in October, to actually be in this haunted castle and have action happen during these podcasts, it'll blow your mind. That's why you got to show up at these places. And great food, great drinks.
Yeah.
Meet new people.
Maybe we can teleport you guys onto the show, because what is Halloween on a Sunday? And our show's on Saturday, so we'll try and figure something out. Let me put something together in my head. All right, and that's our time this evening. We thank you so much for it. Again, you can find him on his podcast, Strange Brow Radio, the Al Moon Lab, the author, Tobe Johnson. Thank you so much for your time this evening.
All right. Nice talking to you, Margo.
Have a good night. See ya.
Bye.